You know that feeling when you wake up with a clear plan for the day? And for a moment, everything feels aligned. You know exactly what needs to be done. It's not even overwhelming, it's just there. And then somehow a few hours pass. You've checked your phone more times than you meant to. You've rearranged small, unimportant things. You've drifted into tasks that weren't really urgent. And the thing you actually cared about doing quietly slips further away. It's not dramatic. It's not even obvious. It just doesn't happen. And later, when you look back on it, there's this quiet question that lingers longer than anything else. Why was that so hard? Most people are quick to answer that question for you. They'll say it's about discipline, that you're not trying hard enough, that you lack consistency, that if you just had more willpower, more structure, more control, things would fall into place. And over time, if you hear that enough, it starts to settle into something deeper. Not just a critique of your habits, but a quiet assumption about who you are. That maybe you're just not a disciplined person.
But that interpretation misses something important, because what looks like a lack of discipline on the surface is often something else entirely underneath. There's more going on here than people realize. What we call discipline is usually treated like a character trait, something stable, something you either have or you don't. But from a psychological and neurological perspective, discipline isn't a trait in the way people think. It's a state. And more specifically, it's a state your brain has to be able to access. And that access isn't always consistent. There's a part of your brain, often called the prefrontal cortex, that handles things like planning, focus, impulse control, and long-term decision-making. But here's the part that doesn't get talked about enough. That system only works well when your nervous system feels safe enough to engage it. When your brain detects stress, uncertainty, pressure, or even subtle emotional discomfort, it shifts resources away from that higher level thinking. It prioritizes survival-based responses instead. Not dramatic survival, not danger in the obvious sense, but things like avoidance, distraction, short-term relief. So when you find yourself reaching for your phone instead of starting something important, it's not always because you lack discipline. It's often because your brain is trying to regulate something. And most of the time, that process happens so quietly, you don't even notice it.
There have been studies showing that when people are under cognitive or emotional strain, their ability to delay gratification drops significantly. Not because they've suddenly become less capable, but because their system is trying to conserve energy and reduce perceived threat. In real life, that doesn't feel like my nervous system is dysregulated. It feels like I just don't feel like doing this right now. And that's where the misunderstanding begins. Because from the outside, and even from your own perspective, it looks like a motivation problem. But internally, it's often a regulation problem. And that difference matters more than it seems. Because if discipline depends on access to certain brain states, then your history, your environment, and your repeated experiences all play a role in how easily you can reach those states. If you grew up in an environment where there was pressure to perform, but not always a sense of emotional safety, your brain may have learned to associate effort with tension. If you were praised only when you achieved something, but not when you tried, your system might quietly link action with evaluation. If you experienced unpredictability, where outcomes didn't always match effort, your brain may have adapted by becoming more cautious about where it invests energy. None of this is conscious, and it doesn't mean anything is wrong. It means your system learned patterns that helped you navigate what you experienced. And those patterns don't just disappear because your goals change.
So, when you sit down to do something meaningful, especially something that matters to you, your brain doesn't just see a task. It may see uncertainty. It may see potential failure. It may see exposure. And without realizing it, it shifts you away from that. Not to sabotage you, but to protect you. That's why discipline can feel inconsistent. Not because you don't have it, but because the conditions that support it aren't always present. And it's important to say this clearly. This isn't better or worse than any other way of functioning. Some people have nervous systems that stay relatively stable under pressure. Others are more sensitive to internal or external shifts. Neither is right, neither is wrong. They're just different adaptations. And every adaptation comes with its own trade-offs. Because the same sensitivity that makes discipline feel harder in certain moments is often the same sensitivity that makes you more aware, more perceptive, more thoughtful. The same system that pulls you away from something overwhelming is also capable of deep focus when it feels safe enough. There's a paradox here that most people don't notice. The more something matters to you, the harder it can be to approach it with discipline. Not because you care too little, but because you care enough that your brain treats it as something that needs to be handled carefully.
So instead of moving toward it directly, you circle around it. You hesitate. You delay. And from the outside, that looks like a lack of discipline. But internally, it's often a sign that the stakes feel real, that there's something meaningful underneath the resistance. And when you start to see it that way, something shifts. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to change how you relate to those moments. Because instead of asking, why can't I just be more disciplined? The question becomes a little different. It becomes, what's happening in me right now that makes this feel hard to approach? And that question doesn't carry the same weight of judgment. It carries curiosity. And curiosity tends to open doors that pressure can't. You're not broken for finding discipline difficult. You're responding in ways that make sense, given what your system has learned over time. And the fact that you notice it, that you care about it, already says something important about you. It means there's a part of you that wants alignment, not perfection, not constant productivity, just alignment between what matters to you and how you move through your days. And that's not something you force into existence. It's something you slowly make safer to access. If any of this feels familiar, there's more to explore here, because the way you approach discipline is only one piece of a much larger pattern, one that shapes how you think, how you feel, and how you relate to the things that matter most to you. And once you start seeing that pattern clearly, things begin to make a different kind of sense.